Hi there, it's Chris Richards with the Richards Mortgage Group. Today I'm just going to do a quick video on developing vacant land with a new home as it relates to mortgage financing. I get a lot of questions on the phone. I thought I could just answer some of these in a video just to help you frame what it is you're trying to do. So to get mortgage financing to develop vacant land, there's sort of four things that have to be in place, and I'll talk about two of them in depth. You need to have, first and foremost, the ability to get a mortgage for the home as if it was complete. I'll talk about that in a minute. You have to have the experience required by the lender so that they know you're going to do your project on time and on budget. The property that you're developing has to meet the specifications for mortgage financing. That's important to know from the start. And the most troubling for people to understand is the cash that's required to develop vacant land. And that's because mortgage lenders do not give you money in advance to acquire land. They don't give you money in advance to make deposits with builders. They don't give you money in advance to put in septic fields or roads or anything like that. So it's imperative that you understand the cash requirements when you're trying to finance your project. And to that regard, we've made a spreadsheet, which a tool that you can use and download on the website, just to help you with your planning and understanding your cash requirements. So one of the things when I talk to people on the phone, the first conversation I have, whether you're phoning to say I want to develop vacant land or hey, there's a home in the city, the question is, can you? Let me turn that down a bit. The question is can you actually get a mortgage? And so to get a mortgage, there's four things. Do you have enough income? What does your credit profile look like? Do you have enough down payment? And what is the property that you're buying? The property is the security for the lender. So they want to know that the property, if you fail to pay, they can still sell the property, take it back through a process called foreclosure, sell the property to somebody else and recover their money. That's what mortgage lending is all about. It's about risk management. So first and foremost, I say to people to help frame it, what are you trying to build? What's your total cost for your project? Someone might say, oh, it's $200 for the land, $400 for the, I'll use those later, write them down, $200 for the land, $400 for the home. So $600. So the question is can you get a mortgage for a $600,000 property? And so we have a conversation. We ask, what does your employment look like? How much income do you make? What kind of debts do you currently have? I do some calculations. They're called debt to income ratios. And we figure out, yeah, your employment supports a mortgage of that size. Perfect. Your credit has to be reasonable enough to convince a mortgage lender to take a risk on you. So if you've got credit issues, those need to be dealt with. If you've got good credit, then that won't be an issue. So I always say to people, envision that home was done and it existed on the market and you just wanted to buy it and you didn't have to do any work. Could you get a mortgage for that, for yourself and for that property? So that comes to what I mentioned about the property. Sometimes people develop property or there's property on the market for sale that's very difficult to finance because the lenders look at it and go, wow, this is a bit of an albatross. Maybe it's a domed house, or it's something funky, or it doesn't have power. It's off grid. Those are all reasons why a lender would not be interested in your property. So you have to make sure when you develop anything that you are developing something that's very financeable. And that's really important. In the manufactured home space, there is an option for people using factory built homes to put them on a permanent foundation. Could be a cement basement, something like that. There's also what's considered non-permanent, even though it's a safe foundation. Wood blocks, for example, for a manufactured home is considered by many lenders as a temporary foundation because you can move the home so easily. And in that regard, the home might be very hard to finance. So again, look at the property as if it was complete and say, is that something easy to finance? Anything that's easy to finance when you build a home, anything that's easy to finance will protect your investment for years to come because when you go to sell that property down the road, the next person will go to their bank, and their bank will look at the property and go, oh yeah, that's fine, that's easy to finance. What you don't want, for example, I've seen people trying to sell homes that they've done their wiring all on their own. There's no permitting for anything. The place is falling apart, and the lenders are saying, we want to see that that was properly permitted, or it doesn't have the proper electrical panel, or whatever the reason is. It creates financing problems down the road, and then the asset does not hold its value or doesn't appreciate. So it's important to look at developing whatever you're developing, that you look at that as an investment. So quickly, the easiest stuff to finance with the most amount of lenders is 10 acres or less. Typically, we find lenders start to discount the loans that they'll do on properties that exceed 10 acres. If the zoning is country residential or residential zoning, that's easy. Quite a few lenders will do agricultural zoning or ALR. Most don't want to see any kind of farming activity. If the property has any kind of zoning that allows commercial use, that's problematic for residential lending. So you'll find that you need a different type of mortgage lender for that. They want to see full services generally. Maybe on a cottage property not, but off-grid homes are certainly problematic for financing. Most lenders like to see a minimum square feet above grade. 800 seems to be the cutoff with most. 800 square feet seems to be the cutoff with most lenders. The home has to be built to the provincial or national building codes. The provinces and nationally we share building codes with modifications for each area depending on climate. But your home has to meet the national building code or provincial equivalent. Lenders are looking for real property permanent foundations. Never seem to have problems with concrete foundations. We talked a little about that earlier. And they need public road access. That's one that a lot of people don't think, but if you're having to travel through a non-public roadway to get to the home, then that can create problems for the value of the home if all of a sudden the access is lost down the road. So can you get a mortgage? You have to have right income, you have to have credit, you have to have the property. So income, credit, and equity is what I call ICE, and then the property. So let's come back to talk a little bit more about the cash required to get a land developed on your own, because this is the part that confuses most people. The cash required to develop land is not the same as down payment. Down payment or equity is what you retain in the property in the end. So we used a $600,000 example. If you retain $100,000 in the property at the end, that means your equity or your down payment is $100,000 on a $600,000 property. The reality is, to acquire the land and get the services that you need to build the property is going to take you more than $100,000. So that's what I call the cash requirements. And that's a little bit different. So those are discussed in detail on my page, but I wanted to say that it's approximately 5 to 7 times the minimum cash that you could buy a house. You could buy a house with as little as 5%. You certainly can't acquire land and develop it with 5%. So let's kind of go through that a little bit more. Lenders will never lend money on your property unless that money's already invested into the ground. So for example, if you're getting a new home built and the builder has the foundation in, the lender will always hold back the amount of money required to complete the project. So if you have your $600,000 project is 2/3 finished, so that's $400,000 into the property and land, and there's $200,000 left to spend, the lender will never advance the $200,000 until that money's in the property. And then once that money's been invested in the property, then they will rebate the money. And that's a term that I use on my webpage. I talk about a rebate just to sort of help clarify how construction financing, land development financing works. So I have a rule, I call it the rule of a third. If you're trying to acquire land and develop it with a foundation, services, new home, etc., it's approximately 1/3 of the total cost is what you will need in cash. And let's just kind of go through that. So if our whole project's $600,000, 1/3 of 600 is 200 grand. I'm saying generally you're going to need about 200 grand to execute your plan. So if we say that the land is 200 and the home is 400, let's just kind of look how fast the 1/3 of the 600 gets spent. You go and you acquire about a land loan, and the first thing you learn, whether on our webpage or talking to your own lender, is yikes, there's not a whole lot of people who will even land on vacant land. And if they do, most of them want 50%. Some in special circumstances, in urban places with a lot of services, high demand, they might reduce the down payment that you need to say 30%, maybe even 25%. So if we say, if you're developing something rural and the lender says, I want 50% down on a $200,000 piece of land, you've already spent 100 grand of your money before you even have the keys to the gate. Then you need to maybe clear the land. You need to bring in equipment. Maybe you need to put in a road access. You need to be a culvert. Maybe you need to talk to the power or hydro company. You've got to talk to, maybe natural gas, septic, well. All of those pieces are what are required to complete your home when it's done. And so you start adding up what it takes to acquire the land. So 50% down, that's 100 grand. Then you start paying for land clearing, wells, septic, power, natural gas or propane, and preparing the site for grading and for foundation. You're easily another $100,000 in before the builder preps, $50,000 to $100,000 in this example, before the builder even shows up to start building. And once the builder starts with a foundation, then once that foundation is in place, the lender may rebate some cost of that foundation and the land. And as the home gets built to lock up, there's some more money can be advanced based on what percent the home is complete and how much is left to be complete. The lender will never advance what's left over. RTM is just a term I use for ready to move. Those are homes that are built off-site, whether in a factory or in a yard. A little bit different in those, in that the improvement, the structure is not even attached to the land, so very difficult for lenders to, or it would be very difficult for you to arrange financing on something that's being built and it's not even attached to the land, because the way that the land title system works is the mortgage is secured against the land, and anything affixed to the land belongs to the land. So lenders aren't interested in giving your builder a deposit, or if a factory says I want 25%, 25%, 25%, while I'm building it, really you're just funding the builder's work in progress. You're not, the money's not going into the land, so that's going to be self-funded. So the items that you need to consider when you're developing land are, you need to acquire the land. What's that going to take for down payment? You've got to put a water well in. What are the payment terms for the well drill, or what's it likely going to cost? Septic, what's it going to cost in your area? What are the permitting? Power, natural gas, site works. Are you going to put a garage? What's your foundation going to cost? So those are all costs that you really need to figure out up front. So when I get a call and someone says, hey, I have a piece of land, I want to develop it, and why I put the spreadsheet on my website is, hey, you guys got to figure out your costs. I don't know what your costs are, but what I'm trying for you to do is get a really good idea of your all-in cost for your project. And so that's really important. And as you start to add up the costs that you need to incur before you'll get any bank money, that's what I call the cash requirement. When you talk to your suppliers, one of the concepts you want to talk about is what I call trade credit. So it's very important to ask payment terms, because if, for example, you were buying a factory built home and the home supplier said, listen, we need 25% of your building cost upon signing the purchase order, and the balance will accept payment once the home is on site, on foundation, and the keys are dangling from your finger. That means they're giving you 75% of the cost in trade credit. So let's take a $200,000 home for easy math. They say they want 25% up front. That's 50 grand that you got to write a check for. Nobody else is writing a check. And they're willing to take the other 150 after the mortgage finances. So the purpose of the tool, what I call the RTM cash flow planning worksheet, is just simply to allow you to tabulate and think about what are those various costs, and also figure out what are their payment terms. So if someone says, well, I want 25% on order, 75% on delivery, then note that in the tool that I've done. If you start to break your project out, whether it's a RTM project or a longer construction that's 7 months or 9 months, you can easily extend the concept. It's all about cash flow planning. You want to know what's due at month 0. So that would be land deposit. What's due in month 1? Probably permitting. Maybe your builder some plans or a down payment. So you've got to figure out what's due in month number 1, what's due in month number 2, what's due in month number 3, what's due in number 4. That's called cash flow. And then what you want to do is compare what cash you have available. What a lot of people discover is, oh my goodness, I don't have enough money, or what I call the cash requirement, to make all the payments as they fall due. So you need to start looking at where could you come up with the cash, because certainly it can get rebated toward the end of the project, or as the mortgage starts to fund, as the home gets near completion, it can get rebated. But for now, you might have to ask a family member for assistance. Maybe I call it the bank of mom and dad. Maybe you've got lines of credit. So all of these things you've got to, if you're trying to convince a lender to give you money for a construction project, you have to convince them that you know your costs, and they're going to ask for them. They want all of the quotes. And then they're going to figure out whether you have enough cash. And so going back to what I call my rule of a third, it varies on the type of property you're making, what province you're in. But generally, when I say what's the all-in cost of your home and land, that's a number that you have to have a fair degree of accuracy. Just for an example, I've talked to manufactured home suppliers, and people come say, hey, I want to live in the country, have a little garden, grow some peaches, and the salesperson say, that's wonderful, do you own land yet? And they say, oh no, I don't own land yet. And he says, well, where do you want to live? Oh, I don't know that. So that might be something that's important at the beginning, because they don't know what the code is for the area that you're going to live in. Conversely, maybe you have land, but what's it going to cost to drill a well? Is this a shallow well that might cost $6,000? Or is this going to be drilling very deep and very difficult to hit in an area where there's not a lot of water, and it's going to cost you $30,000? So you really need to get a handle on your costs when you're considering a project like this. So you've got all your quotes together, your cost of the land, you have a good idea of your project, you've created a buffer, perhaps 10% for cost overruns. So just going to quickly touch on how construction financing works. I talked a little bit already about that. The term for construction financing is called progress draw financing, which means you get rebated after progress has been made. A lot of lenders don't even provide construction financing because it's a tricky area. Other lenders do. They have what's called their draw schedule figured out, which means you need to get to this point in milestones. They send out an inspector. The inspector says, you're good, you're complete to that milestone as agreed. And then the lender will rebate you money. That money then goes back. It goes back to your lawyer, it goes to the builder, and they carry on with the project. So it's very critical that you don't run out of money, and that's why all of this due diligence is required in terms of knowing your costs and knowing who your builder is and knowing your experience. Is if you run out of money mid-project, it's a mess to get out of, and lenders don't even want to go there. I mentioned it was a little tricky with manufactured homes because while there might be a little bit of money available for foundation and money available to rebate after foundation is in place, the next big milestone isn't until the home's actually delivered and placed on a foundation and secured, that's at the next point that a lender can actually give you money. And again, not all lenders, in fact, just a few lenders might have a special project financing for the RTM space. So it's important, as I've mentioned, the lenders only pay on progress. That's why it's called progress construction financing. You get rebated after progress is made. There are different types of builds. Lenders look at risk. They look at what's called a self-build, a fixed price build, and a turnkey build. Those are discussed on the webpage in more detail, but very quickly, a self-build is where you are acting as a general contractor. You're arranging the costs to, you're arranging the trades and determining the costs that are going to go into your project, and you're going to call up the trades, etc., as time passes, and they're going to come out and do the work. Typically on a self-build, you don't have that same level of experience or access to trades as, say, that a licensed builder might have. And so I would say the risk of self-builds is that time frame to build is actually quite long. So you might think you're saving money in that regard, but your interest paid on hundreds of thousands of dollars borrowed as time advances adds to your cost in a way that you might not have thought about. Yeah, self-build is what I call a variable price contract, because while you had your electrical quote at, say, $20,000 and it comes in at $30,000, yikes, do you have enough buffer for the overrun? And I've seen some horrible overruns in electrical go from 75 to 125 when they just kept adding little bits and pieces, and before they knew it, they had a runaway budget. So that's the risk of a self-build. And if you're going the self-build route, you have to really convince a lender that you're not going to run out of money. And so they usually require a buffer of another 10 to 15% of the project cost of not the land, but the construction components, that you have that in addition to your regular cash requirements. A fixed price build is less risk when you're building a home. A fixed price build is where you enter into a contract with a builder, and the builder specs out everything regarding the land. Same thing that my template's all about is, what are the costs? Well, the builder knows the costs. So the builder specs out all of the costs and gives you a contract price, including tax, of what you will pay to them, whether that's at the end of the project, called a completion mortgage, or through construction financing throughout, maybe 3 or 4 draws throughout the project. So that's called a fixed price build. The builder takes on the risk because they have to quote you accurately. They have to quote you tight enough to win your business. So, because presumably you're competing, talking to other builders, they have to quote you tight enough. And likewise, they still have to manage their risk of cost overrun, because that becomes the builder's risk. And if there is overruns, then that comes out of the builder's profit, not you, because you've signed a fixed price contract. So less risk to you, more risk to the builder. I'll argue that a fixed price build is probably less risky. If you're building an area where there's a lot of demand for trades, or conversely, there are no trades because it's in Timbuktu, you might want to consider a factory built home where everything's built on site and all that's needed is foundation prep and site prep locally, and the rest is done in a factory. So the last type of build, so we talked about self-build, fixed price build, call it a turnkey build. And a turnkey build is common in the city. That's where builder owns the lot and says, hey, have this lot, you choose the house, and maybe they want 5 or 10% down, and you choose your colors, you sign off on everything, and then they go to work. At the end of the project is called completion. They have to get what's called an occupancy certificate, which proves that they've met closed out all the permits, and the home is ready for you to live in. And at that point, the bank's inspector comes in and says, yes, it's complete, and advances the money that was pre-approved or actually approved at the very beginning of the project. So when you want to do a self-build, I've talked to you about the rule of a third. You probably need the total cost of land, or you can include the cost of the land and all your project costs plus a buffer divided by 3 is what I call a rule of third. That's the amount of cash and equity that you need to start with. When I say equity, if you own land, free and clear, for example, we can actually refinance that land at the beginning of your project such that you can take cash out of that land and use that to pay builders and deposits, etc. So the equity counts. It's a common question. Fixed price build might be a little bit less. It's just what deposits are needed to get on the land and get the builder going. The turnkey build is where I just mentioned, where you're buying the completed project. The builder might say 10% is all they need up front, the balance on completion. That's the same as just buying a home that's existing, except it's a new home. So if you can, that's the easiest one to mortgage qualify for. As I mentioned, can you get a mortgage? If you don't have the cash to develop the project, then you probably have to buy an existing home or find a builder that will sell you the lot and the home at completion.